Hello, I'm John Ng, and this is the Good People Podcast.
It's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here.
Yes, welcome to another episode of the Good People Podcast. My name is Andy from In Other Good News, and I'm joined today by a man who you may know. But we're going to flip the script today, and we're going to tell the story of a man who normally tells all of the stories. His name is John Ng. John, welcome to the show.
Hello, I feel welcomed already.
No, it's great to have you in the studio, John. And I'd like to also just open with a little bit about where you're from. So you've created the Humans of Sky and Inner West Facebook page.
Yes.
Fantastic place for you to tell local stories.
That's right.
You've got Money Jar Concept. You're a mortgage broker.
Mm-hmm.
You describe yourself as your favourite bald and bespectacled broker.
Find me another bald and bespectacled broker around here.
You were voted in 2020 Citizen of the Year in Maribyrnong City Council. In 2020, you were a finalist, Social and Community Engagement Program of the Year. In 2022, 20 Brokers to Watch.
I didn't ask for any of that, by the way.
In 2022, finalist, Social and Community Engagement Program of the Year. And in also 2021, we missed Best Community Engagement Program.
I try. Can you tell?
Yeah. I mean, what a snowball. That's coming from 2020 and it's starting to roll on through. So it seems like success is coming your way, but it hasn't started in 2020.
No, people tend to see all the good stuff, but like the tip of the iceberg, there's a lot of hard work that goes behind it, just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the famous saying, the overnight success in 10 years. In your case, you've been here 20 years.
20 years, yeah, this month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
20 years in Australia. So what I like to do is I like to dig in to find out who the real John is. Because a lot of what we see is just what we're seeing you on billboards.
Again,
in fact, it's a brand new billboard, with John on it. We saw you a while back with another campaign. It was a vaccination
Correct.
campaign.
Yeah.
Supporting health and vaccinations.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw you there, but we've seen you around town, and of course, your Humans of Sky Facebook page. You've been telling stories, hundreds of local stories,
Yes.
all around the inner west of Melbourne.
Correct.
It's been fantastic to watch. Plus, of course, you've appeared on, multiple things here. I've got a list here: Herald Sun, ABC, propertyfinder.com.au, and numerous broker magazines.
Thank you.
But you love telling a good story, and that's how a lot of people will know you. The Humans of Sky has given you the ability to tell stories of the everyday people around town. And I think that's probably what I like about it. Excuse me so much. But I'd like to go back and I'd like to look at where you came from and how that led you to where we are now and telling these stories, because I think it's a beautiful story. You were born in Malaysia?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're originally Chinese grandparents fleeing China.
Yeah. There's a massive Chinese diaspora around the world, and a lot of them left even the previous century, as slaves and workers around the world. But my grandparents had fled southern China, to flee Japanese persecution because it was the Second World War. And I think some of my grandparents' relatives also left China because there was a famine there. So there was no food there. It's 1 billion people. So they went south to Malaysia, where it's got one of the world's largest Chinese diaspora. And my parents were born there. And obviously I was born there as well.
You were born in Malaysia,
yeah.
And then you moved when you were 3 years old to Singapore?
To Singapore.
Yeah.
They wanted a better life.
Yeah.
They weren't fleeing Japanese then, or there wasn't lack of food in Malaysia, but
Yep.
they just wanted a better life.
Okay.
And they kept going further south. Yeah.
And so you lived there for all your childhood.
Yes.
up until you were finishing school. You're a young man. You even did the compulsory military service in Singapore.
National service.
2
years.
Military man.
Yes.
How did you go in the military?
I could strip an M16 and assemble it within a minute. I've lobbed grenades, jungle survival, but I've forgotten all of that, honestly.
Would you say you were a disciplined soldier?
No, I wasn't. I know. People look at me now and say, "Look at that upstanding young man. You know, he's a father of 3, citizen of the year." But if I told you I was, what's the word? Recalcitrant. I'm a horrible young man back in my days, and because what normally happens, you spend 5 days in camp, 5-6 days, and you book out Saturday afternoon. You got to book back in Sunday evening. But a lot of those weekends were spent washing the toilets and on guard duty. I never got to see home. Rarely got to see home.
You didn't get to go home because you were a naughty soldier.
I just didn't want to listen to the staff sergeants, and I was constantly just getting them very agitated, and they just didn't like me.
So going against the trend.
Correct.
So you're a young bloke in Singapore. You were what, 20 years old?
I was 20 when I went to national service.
Yeah. And you were there for a couple of years?
Came out at 22.
Yeah, which is like, we've talked about this in the past, like when you're a 20-year-old man, that's a real like go out and explore kind of period of your life. You're trying to work out who you are and what you're going to do, and you're in the military and hating it, right? Like it must have been a challenging time for you, given that you had to be there.
You lose a lot of your youth and the prime of your working life as well. I mean, that's where you're trying to establish, grow your roots, trying to find what you want to do. In Australia, I know a lot of kids take a gap year but they're actually doing things they enjoy. Look, in hindsight, I look back and I've only got nice things to say, and I just laugh about national service. And you speak to someone else, they might say some other things about national service, but I hated every minute of it. Yeah.
So obviously you didn't stay with the military.
No, but but even after you do your 2 years, we got to do reservists, as you got to be there and report once a year. So I've only been back once, but since I came over to Australia in 2005, I've never been called back because, frankly, they're not going to but get a plane ticket for me, and I've got a life here.
So they could call you back, are you saying?
But I finished my reservists. I finished my reservists when I was 40.
Okay.
Oh, I should say 21, because now people might know how old I am. So.
Yeah, give it away.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. But
all right. So even when you're in the reserves, you can be called back?
You can be called back.
Wow.
You got to go back over the 12-month period. They'll call you back for about 2 or 3 weeks just to sharpen your the
skills,
the blunt edges,
yeah.
and just get yourself familiar with the guns and the big guns and all the stuff you need to do.
Yeah. And so, what did your parents want you to do when you were growing up?
Just like any traditional parents from the previous era, they'll say, "Oh, you got to be a doctor, an engineer, a scientist," but that never actually eventuated. My dad actually, gullible me, listened to that and said, because he said, you got to do mechanical engineering. That's a good discipline to have, and you can become an engineer. And I dropped out after 2 years in Polytechnic there. It's a 3-year diploma.
Yep.
I barely got past the first year, and by the second year, I just said, this is not me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
couldn't see yourself as a grease monkey.
No chance. look at my my knuckles. It's just so smooth. There are no calluses, and it's not my thing.
Not your thing.
Yeah, getting dirty.
So then, what did you do? I mean, you're out of the military. You've decided I'm not going to do what my parents are telling me to do. Then what did you do?
So when I came out at 22, because I've dropped out of the Polytechnic there, naturally I have to get myself up to speed from an education point of view. And for the next 2 years, I got a communications diploma, and I got a job in Saatchi & Saatchi, one of the largest advertising companies in the world back then. I don't know about now.
Sure.
And I quite enjoyed my time there. Spent about a year there, as an advertising executive, and I learned a lot about, I mean, how newspaper ads were. The page 3 is when it's the most expensive because
Yeah,
it's the
of
first
course.
page you see, and then people pay a lot just to get a full color print, full page print. Obviously, things have changed then because everything is digital now. So, but I learned a lot, and
Yeah.
and
And you're doing that full time? You're working
I
full
was
time?
full time. I was in my still early 20s,
Yep.
and but by that point, I was beginning to wonder what next. But
Yeah.
because I just didn't see any way out of Singapore
No.
at that point. Yeah, I was just happy to stay there, but I was like, I don't know what else is there in there for me. I'll just roll with the punches and just
Yep.
I'll just you go where the wind blows.
And so the wind did blow, and the wind blew to someone that you already knew,
Yes.
that you'd met in Singapore, and then you decided to sort of start a long distance relationship with.
We didn't decide to start. Unfortunately, Michelle was already in Melbourne. We were friends for a few years, and I just thought I really like this girl, but I just wanted to see whether this can be taken any further.
Yeah.
So 2004, in July 2004, this was when the European Championships was on. I remember it. That's football for anyone who's not into it.
Yeah.
I came over just for 2 weeks to see, it's
See if it was going to work.
stop messing around with me. Are
Uh-huh.
you actually serious? And
Sure.
we ended up, obviously started going out, but I had to go back because I got my job in advertising to go back to.
Yep.
So we were dating long distance for about 6 months.
Yep. That's hard, isn't it?
Yeah. And towards, and I'll tell you, to anyone who's listening to this and thinking about doing long distance, it doesn't work. It's even harder if it's overseas as well. I mean, if you're domestic, and I know Australia's a big country, you're 2 or 3 hours away domestic flight, it's okay. But we're talking 8 hours international flight.
It's difficult. It's hard to.
It's difficult.
Yeah,
it's
and
difficult.
expensive. Expensive to you can't just pop over.
Correcto mundo.
Yeah.
But lo and behold, my mom always knew that I've always wanted to get a taste of the overseas life and get out of Asia for a few years. And that same year, towards the end of the year, she turned to me and said, "Look, would you like to explore getting a degree, a bachelor's done overseas? I've known you always want to go overseas. Do you want to? And we've got some money there for you." It wasn't much, to be honest. I still had to take a loan.
Yeah.
And I've always known it was either a choice between Canada or Australia.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go to Europe. Definitely not United States.
Yep.
But at that point, Michelle has already been here in Melbourne for 3 years, and it was a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And I thought I have a chance to come over here as an international student, a mature age international student, and hang out with a girl I really like,
Yeah.
who I've been dating long distance for about half a year.
John the Romantic chooses Australia.
I know. I mean, look, who knows? Had I gone to Canada, I wouldn't be sitting here, and things would have been different. But
great.
I went over. And
So you come over. You left your full time job.
it was either she had to quit her nursing job. She's a nurse, by the way,
Yeah.
at a children's, and go back to Singapore, or me quit my advertising job and my aspirations of having a career in there and come over here. So
Yep. And so how did your mum feel about the fact that you were also travelling to be with a non-Chinese? Because
Yes.
she's not Chinese, is she? She's
so and I always look back and think it's really funny now, but given that we're talking about the previous generation, and a lot of them are quite entrenched in their way of thinking, so and even now, I mean, I think back and I just laugh. But the day my son was born, he's in year 8 now. When Levi was born, my mom came over for a couple of weeks, and she took one look at him and said, "He's not Chinese." And it's you think about it, you just kind of laugh at it, but it's very sad. And she's never really accepted Michelle as a daughter-in-law because she's not Chinese. And to understand how all this, I wouldn't say it's the deep-rooted racism. It's just, when you just didn't expect your son to to marry a non-Chinese. It's just if you're Chinese, and especially when
The
it's in some,
expectation is that you would just...
that's right. And I'm
Yeah.
an older son, and then
I mean, she was
yeah.
from Singapore. Like, you met in Singapore, but
correct.
just not
So
of Chinese heritage.
culturally, we were very similar because we grew up in we were familiar with the food there.
Yep.
It's just she's not of Chinese descent,
Yep.
but
And
that's
so-
not nice.
Yeah.
Mum.
And so you also said that, like, you weren't particularly happy in Singapore either. It wasn't sort of the place where you wanted to be.
I think when people visit Singapore, they see the nice glamorous stuff, like the Marina Bay Sands, which is and it's always very clean, and but people also only see the things they want to see. There's actually a massive gap between the wealthy and the poor. It's far more. The gap is even bigger than compared to here in Melbourne. And also, it's very regimented country. There's a reason why Singapore is so successful in just 6 decades, because the government says A, you don't do B. And as a result, the people growing up there, you don't question whatever the government says.
Yeah.
And people are extremely law-abiding. And people grow up with in a one-track mind way, as in you only listen to the authorities, the cops. The government says A, you just do it. You listen to your parents. So anyone who tries and fall on the wayside and do anything otherwise is seen as someone who's trying to be different,
Yeah.
and they try and pick on you, which is what happened in national service. My staff sergeants and my officers didn't like me. And similarly, it's I just didn't find myself enjoying myself growing up there, because I was told how to speak in a certain way, dress in a certain way, behave in a certain way, which I had none of that when I first came here as an international student. I just found that the way that I wanted to speak, behave, and talk is completely acceptable here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You obviously got the entrepreneurial spirit. And if that doesn't really fit with where you're living, then I could see why you'd want to up and change,
go.
look
Yeah.
for something new.
Correct.
So obviously, with that kind of spirit comes some costs, which is you come here and you're unemployed. You come as a student, mature age student, and you continue communications. You said that you struggled to find work when you were here. You were doing a lot of odd jobs and things to facilitate that. I mean, we'll get to Michelle in a moment, but that's a big change to come from fully employed
Yeah,
to come here and have none of that.
correct.
Yeah.
As an international student, you're only limited to 20 hours of paid work.
Oh, right.
And I think that law still exists, but that's why you see a lot of foreign students who get paid cash in hand and who work way past 20 hours. I never did any of that, because by the third year, I realized things were quite serious and I wanted to do things properly with her. So even after I graduated at 27 with a communications degree, because I was still a foreigner, and I was in the process of getting my permanent residency through her, because we got married a year after. And because I haven't had the visa come through, I was stacking shelves, I was washing dishes,
Yep.
making sandwiches for that factory up the road in West Footscray, the Olex, the tower.
Yeah.
We used to make sandwiches for them, data entry,
Yeah.
night work, just doing all kinds of random jobs,
Yeah.
just to pay the mortgage. By then, we've already bought a house.
Yes.
And
You had a kid on the way? I think.
and then the kid on the way. Yeah, when here's one thing that always gives me the burning desire to get to do better things, because when he was born, I was actually unemployed. I've just been let go by the previous employment.
Yep.
I think just didn't want a part-timer. They wanted a full-time or something. So when he was born, I was actually jobless.
Jobless, yeah.
And I still hadn't gotten my permanent residency. And a few weeks after he was born, it's actually the same period. So here's a funny thing. Maybe I can't remember the exact timeline, but within 2 weeks of him being born, that 14-day period, I got my permanent residency, right? And I got a call from the recruitment lady who's been giving me odd jobs for the last few years. And, she said, "John, I've got to know you for a few years now, and you can really talk shit." You can actually sell ice to an Eskimo. Like you can really talk really well. I was like, oh, thanks. So she landed. She said, I've got a job for you, and it's a full-time job because I got a residency then.
Yeah.
And she got me a job in the National Australia Bank as a debt collector. So for the first year of my life in Bankland, and that was my first full-time job in Australia, and I was 30 years old. I've been here in Australia for 5 years, and that was my first full-time job.
It was your first full-time job?
At 30. This wasn't too long ago.
Yeah.
And I got to see the back end of how debt can really cripple people. It was so fascinating. I just thought, it's amazing how...
Because you're making regular calls to ask for money, right?
I was saying, excuse me, is this Andy Fithall? Hi, my name is John from the National Australia Bank. Can I, we do go through the ID process. And it's National Australia Bank because you're owing money anyway.
Yeah.
So you're currently in arrears of $2,500. When are you going to pay up,
Yeah.
And this is the kind of stuff...
and you're doing that all day, right?
All day for a year.
Yeah.
And
so you must have had some moments on the phone as well, like the people that you're talking to.
They'll abuse you, they'll scream at you, but they're on the phone. And obviously sometimes you feel really sad for them because sometimes the tough luck stories are quite heartbreaking. But a lot of them are just lifestyle choices they made, and they got to the current situation, and you just got to do what you got to do. And you got a target to hit as well as a debt collector.
Yep.
It's like a sales target, but reverse. You got to collect X amount.
Collect that.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
G'day, it's Andy here from In Other Good News, and I hope you're enjoying today's episode of the Good People Podcast. Do you know back in 2020 we created Grindhog Day, our very own line of coffee beans that supports the amazing charity Foodbank. Every single purchase of Grindhog Day coffee puts food on the table for vulnerable Australians. But we knew that we couldn't just create any old coffee. We had to create something that would rival the best that is out there. So we've got a blend from Colombia, Brazil, and Papua New Guinea, and it's something that I think is purely magical. But you don't have to take my word for it. Why don't we ask these couple of geezers?
How's your coffee, Sonny? Delicious. I can really taste the premium beans. Such a generous aftertaste. Are you old enough to drink coffee? I have a moustache, don't I?
Since we launched Grindhog Day Coffee back in 2020, we have created over 35,000 meals through the Foodbank system. So if you want to do something good just by drinking good coffee, head to iogn.com.au and order yours today. We've got free and fast delivery for those who live in the inner west of Melbourne, plus we ship Australia-wide. And if you love it, we've got a subscription, so your coffee will turn up on time, every time, and you'll never run out. Amazing. Head to iogn.com.au and order yours today. Now, let's get back to the episode.
So you went from debt collection, but that was sort of almost your foot in the door, right?
It was,
into banking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got to a point where I thought, if I was collecting money pretty well over the phones, and I thought if I can collect money over the phone pretty well, surely I can sell something. And I spoke to the team leaders, and they said within 6 months they put me to sales on the front end this time, not the back end. And I was just flogging credit cards and personal loans to anyone who wants to pick up a product from me.
Yep.
And again, I started to do it pretty well, and within a year, I can't remember the timeline. Within a year or two, I was moved to home loans, and I started selling home loans.
Yep.
And that's when I finally went full circle. I was right in the front line, in the thick of things, and selling and the Andy Fit halls out there, home loan.
Yep.
And because
I wouldn't do it. Can't trust him.
I know
Bad debts. Yeah.
Because I've got all this experience in collections, I knew how debt might destroy someone. So I was always quite careful to just flog a product. But at the end of the day, I was completely dictated by the sales tactics and the pressure that a big four bank has on you, and you have to get numbers on the whiteboard.
Yep.
So
you had maybe there was a moment there for you to realise that perhaps finance, but don't necessarily love cookie cutter home loans to people that maybe shouldn't be getting them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the home loan you're flogging may not even be most suitable for them.
Yep.
And so I ended up staying in NAB for about 7.5 years. 2 and a bit years in collections, and about 5 years in sales.
Yeah, right.
And that's what's the word? That's how you cut your mustard. That's how I That's
cut your teeth.
Cut your teeth.
That's how you cut your teeth. Yeah.
What's it saying? Cut
So
your
that
teeth.
so that inspired you to get out
Yeah.
and to sell as a mortgage broker with your own business.
I got very disenchanted with what I was doing. I was, I've got an hour appointment with Joe and Jane Bloggs, flogged them every product under the sun. I walked them out of the branch and then shook their hands, and I ran back to the tea room and just put, sales target hit on the credit card, personal loans, insurance, and then turned around and there was another couple coming in and sat on the same seat that's still warm from the couple that had just vacated the seat.
Yeah.
It was just rinse and repeat, and I hated it.
Yeah, okay.
And I thought there's got to be a better way of doing it.
Yep.
So at that point, I began to explore other options, and I realized brokers were around, and they didn't just represent, in this case,
One
National
bank.
Australia Bank.
They
They represented numerous institutions, and there's an option for Jane and Joe Bloggs to have a product that might actually be more suitable for them.
Yeah.
And
They could get a bit more choice and a bit more, yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So I left
Yep.
in 2016.
And did you have something, like, had you already established Money Jar at that point, or were you...
No, I knew I was going to start a business. I had no idea what the business name was going to be.
Yeah.
I took a 4-month hiatus, had a bit of money in the bank, and I thought, so I was actually quite ballsy. Come to think of it,
Yeah.
I left a job, a safe job in a safe environment.
Of course.
But I just wasn't happy in there anymore. And I took time to think about what I want.
Yeah. Well, it's good that that's the thing. You can sit in the safety of big corporate and you could stay there forever.
You could stay there forever. Yeah.
You'd be financially fine, and a lot of these things that affect other people wouldn't affect you. But at the end of the day, happiness is a lot more important, right?
But you're not happy, and sometimes when your back's against the wall, because at the end of the day, I wasn't bringing home money for a few months, and I knew I had to do something. When you've got to feed a family of 2, and if you include Michelle as 3, you really have to do something. So the business was formed in December 2017.
Yeah, cool. And in parallel to that,
parallel to that,
because we're multi-dimensional people, you see, you have gone ahead and created Humans of Sky. So it's a Facebook group. It is Sky, for those who aren't local, is Seddon, Kingsville and Yarraville, and inner western suburbs. And you have started telling stories of local people, and they are, a mixed bag. You've had everything celebrity through to
celebrities,
average Joe. You've told a lot of a lot of stories.
Yeah.
That's a lot of work. You were putting. You've done hundreds of these.
168, 160, something like that.
Yeah. And they're not. These aren't a selfie in 2 lines. Like, these are longer form pieces of writing that you're produced to tell these people's stories, which is sitting down, hearing their story, writing it all down. So it's been great storytelling, and I'm assuming that's part of what led to you becoming Citizen of the Year in 2020?
For anyone who's listening to this, I just want to say Andy was actually one of the 160 odd humans
That's right.
last year. So I have forgotten the date, but he's one of them.
Yeah, it was around March.
There you go.
It was in March last year,
there
which
you
feels
go.
like yesterday.
It does. It does.
Depending on when you're listening to this as well.
That's right.
It might be 5 years ago by the time you hear it. But
It's 2023, by the way.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. At the moment, time of this recording. So yes, I was one of your stories, and that was a really interesting experience because I was sitting there, and it's not often, as you're experiencing today, that you actually sit down and dissect your own story. And there were times we're sitting in a cafe in Yarraville, telling the story. There were times where I was getting really emotional.
You were.
I was thinking about.
You actually stopped.
Yeah, I was thinking about some of the stuff that had happened and why it happened and what I did. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, that was some heavy times. Like we're talking through COVID and things like that. So I had people talk to me afterwards and say, oh, that's really interesting. I have wondered what your story was. So I think everyone who's had their story told would have appreciated people, learning about their past. And
I think and I never had any intention for this to happen to make people cry, but I would say about 20 or 30% of people who spend an hour or so with me sharing the story, they get emotional because a lot of them would say, I've never had a chance to tell my story or just think about my life. You're always so caught up with the hustle and bustle of everyday stuff, and someone just sitting opposite you asking about your story, and you got to think, 60 years ago. Because I've interviewed people as old as in the 80s, in the 20s, and all walks of life. With cerebral palsy, people who don't speak English. We've got to get a family member as a translator as well.
oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's and people actually pause and for that hour or two, nothing else really matters because the spotlight's on you. Actually, come think about it, it's kind of like what I'm going through right now.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, exactly. You're sort of thinking about where you've come from and why, and all of a sudden, I mean, some of those times are pretty heavy times, like having no job, having a kid, no job, having no citizenship, having uprooting from Singapore with basically coming with nothing except a dream.
Yeah,
and then so I think it really can be an emotional experience telling your own story, and that's why we're doing it, right? That's why we want to tell it, because we want to hear people's we want to hear it from their account and not just what you read online. I mean, the John that we see around town is the guy on the billboard, or or the guy getting about in your car that you see getting around town. But no one knows that those parts that have happened. No one knows the challenges that you would have faced as a migrant coming to Australia, first generation migrant coming to Australia. How do you feel about those challenges in combination with telling these stories? Like, do you think that's helped? Or has it made you want to tell these stories?
The first story I told was of Jimmy Wynn. He's the owner of the dry cleaners in Yarraville. He's still there. And his parents came on a boat. So I just thought there's a bit of affinity there. So because I didn't come on a boat, but I came here as a foreigner as well. And he experienced obviously racism as well, and I think I might just touch on racism a little bit.
Yeah.
It's sorry, what was the question again?
Well, basically, like, you've come here as a migrant, and you've experienced a whole bunch of things that maybe you weren't expecting as well.
So, I mean, it's 2023 now, and subtle racism still exists on a daily basis. Not just speaking for myself. Let's talk about the name.
Yeah.
So, and in East Asian and Southeast Asian culture, the nameology, as in the way your name is structured, last names, or we call it surnames, that's your family name. Family names comes first in my culture because family is always the most important, followed by the individual's name. That's less important. But over here, because of the Western beliefs, I would say, your individual rights and your name is more important than your family. So the last name always comes last. So in Singapore, Ng's actually comes first.
Yep.
But when I came here, they flipped it around.
Yep.
So my legal name is actually Ng,
Yep.
Keng Hong. That's my Chinese dialect name. But over here, they flipped it around and became Keng Ng.
Yep.
The Hong bit is actually not my middle name. It's actually, I've got two first names,
part of your first
which
name,
is
yeah.
very common in Chinese names. But they thought the Hong is the middle
Must
name.
be a middle name.
So they butchered it, and I flipped everything around. So if I were to call you, it's similar to you being called Fit Hall N.
Yep. Half of my first name.
Correct.
Yeah.
You might, I'm guessing you might have a middle name, but I'm just
Yeah.
going to use Andy Fithole as an example.
Sure.
Yeah, Fithole, and that's your legal name here.
Yeah.
And it the first 3 years as an international student here in 2005 to 2007 or 8, it just took me a long time to wrap around it. Like, because when you fill in the details, it's asking for your first and last name, and very often for first name I put in Ng. Then I'm like, oh shit. I mean,
that's not
that's
it.
right.
Yeah.
And now people see the name and you think, oh, did this assume I'm Vietnamese, or they don't
Because of the name. Yeah.
yeah, and they don't try and pronounce it and they just spell it, which I think it's no fault of their own. I think sometimes racism happens because of a lack of awareness. I wouldn't say education, lack of awareness, and you just need someone to call it out and just say, give it a good go. I mean, if you see a strange-looking Polish name, I struggle with some of them as well, or maybe a Serbian name, but I just ask, and they're extremely happy to tell you how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
And you learn something for the day. So for anyone who's listening out there and wondering how Ng is actually pronounced, because you're listening to it now, it rolls off your tongue, but give it a couple of weeks, and then you might see the name again. You might go, too hard.
Yep. You must say Ing, because that's the Vietnamese is Ing. Yeah, like they say more like a.
With an invisible eye? No, it's the way I like to say it, I like to put things with a bit of a humorous spin to it. So I just say, imagine you're constipated on the toilet and you're trying to get it out, and that sound you make, is
that the sound you make?
I don't know. I'll call you when it actually happens. How's that? But it's like the guttural sound you make. And I just say, say running, jumping, swimming, that sound.
Yeah.
And once you say that, people get it.
Yeah.
But you actually need to hear it to know how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
And people see you for what you represent.
Yeah.
They don't see you as an individual. Unfortunately, there are a lot of stereotypes for people out there who look like me, and there are a lot of them out there. They're everywhere.
Yep.
You must know kung fu, you must play ping pong, and all that kind of nonsense, which further cements that stereotype, and they don't look at you as an individual. And I guess part of me wanting to do Human to Sky is, at that point I was still working at NAB, but I was really getting bored with bank jobs and the daily grind, and I wanted to meet people like yourselves and tell stories. There has to be some. I wanted people who look like me to have representation.
Sure.
Because so often you see people like myself. Oh, he must be good at math. I'm not good at math actually, even though I'm a broker. But
you got a calculator.
Yeah, I've got a calculator. But you don't often see someone who by distinction probably doesn't. English isn't his first language, but it is for me.
Yep.
And going around interviewing people, being extremely out there, and the stereotype of people who look like me is they're quiet. Don't really speak for themselves, and maybe more so in Asia, but in Southeast Asia, I would say, not Asia generally, but yeah, it's nice to represent
the minorities and help.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And even though I never wanted it. I didn't start Human to Sky as a way to stand out and be representing people who look like me.
Yep.
over the years, I realized, there has to be more positive reinforcement for people who look like me. And we live in an extremely multicultural country. And if we look at, I probably said some racist things myself when growing up in Singapore, because I'm an ethnic majority in Singapore as a Chinese. And we have the ethnic and Indians, the indigenous people, the Malays there in Singapore, and obviously anyone else who's an Eurasian or someone from Europe, got Caucasian. And Michelle, she's South Asian herself. So
this is your wife, Michelle?
Yeah, Michelle. Yeah, she's Sri Lankan. So and growing up, I would learn things like you say derogatory stuff on the color of South Asian skin. You're dark, and we just call them nicknames. I said it myself, and you have stereotypes about the intelligence of a group of people. Yeah. And then coming over here, it's I'm now an ethnic minority. Yeah. And I now suffer racism, not overtly. Maybe the first few years as an international student, people thought I don't speak much English. But over here now, people know I live here and my kids are here. But it's still
present.
It's still present.
Yeah.
Your names, and they see you and
And so something that we have spoken about and you encouraged me to say was that I grew up in country Victoria. I grew up in a town where there was almost all white people. We didn't have exposure to many cultures. We had a very limited lexicon of nicknames. Everyone was sort of pulled into a handful of nicknames for people that we were from different cultures, and it was incredibly racist. It was incredibly racist. I think back to the jokes we used to tell as kids growing up, teenagers. I think now I'm really embarrassed by those sort of things because they were ignorant. They weren't sensitive to any other culture other than our own. And I really noticed it when I moved down for university. I went to Victoria University in Footscray, and I was immediately exposed to a lot of other cultures. And so it wasn't that I was naturally wanting to be racist, xenophobic. I wasn't planning ever to be someone who was against other cultures. It was my ignorance and lack of exposure that sort of shielded me a little bit. So when I came to Melbourne, I met all these great people, and I started to really get involved in a lot of different cultures. I naturally was starting to want to learn how to greet people in their native languages. And I think in my first year of uni, I think I had 22 different greetings of all the people that I'd met in my course, because I just really wanted to be able to speak something in their language.
That's great.
So it was a lot. I had to work pretty hard on that. And I had a couple of friends who were Australian born, but their families were Spanish speaking. So I learned a fair bit of Spanish from my friends at uni, probably wasn't concentrating.
Buenos dias?
Buenos dias.
Yes.
Yeah. So my Spanish isn't great, but it was a great it was a great entry into language and whatnot. So it was a really big eye opener for me. But as I grew older, I realized just how much I'd been shielded and how racist we were. And like I say now, I fully understand now how you could feel that.
It really affects your day, but it's through no fault of your own. Obviously, we are all byproducts of the environment and culture that we grew up in. But it doesn't mean that has to stay the same. Like had I stayed in Singapore since my early 20s, I would still probably be an ethnic majority. I would be. I would just be making racist remarks on ethnic minorities, and I'll probably say, the white people, the Europeans are coming here to take our jobs, steal our women, and all that kind of rubbish that you hear, which really isn't true. But but over here in Melbourne, we still get that. And there was I just want to mention a funny one, which really upset me back then. But in hindsight, you just laugh it off. Like you're at a shop, and then an old person comes up to you. Well, not an old person. Someone comes up to you with something with Korean words on it. Excuse me, can you please tell me what this says? I'm like, WTF? Are you serious? And then just because I look like them doesn't mean, yeah, it's like me asking you, hey, do you speak, like, what does this German word say? You know?
Yeah.
It's akin to that. So
And that's the sort of, would that be something you would get often?
not now, but I do get Vietnamese a lot. But I mean, just that day, just outside Alpha in Yarraville Village, I was chatting with a client, and it was a really old guy, probably Greek, and I don't blame him at all. It's again byproduct of he walked, just was shuffling his feet, and he said "ni hao," which means "how are you?" Good day in Mandarin. I just thought, okay, this is very unexpected, but he just assumed I was of Chinese descent. But maybe he was just being polite, like he doesn't know any other words, and he thought, that's the way a way to break the ice. And I laughed, but I just thought slightly racist there, but I laughed,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an old guy. What am I going to do?
And so, like, you've created, self-made man, come here, you've created a business. How do you want to pass that on, these sort of messages to your children? Like, you've said about being unhappy in Singapore. Is that the reason why you don't want to bring up your kids in Singapore, or prefer to bring them up here in a different environment?
Yeah, the boys will have to do national service the moment they turn 18 and lose 2 years of their life and potentially tens of thousands of income. And that would set them back by 2 years compared to their peers, which is what I found myself in when I came here. And the weather I didn't like, the humidity, the regimented way of living, and being told there's only one way to do things. I quite enjoy my life here now. I can be who I want. I don't need to be told how to wear clothes, dress, speak. And
what are your hopes for your children growing up in, like? And what do you aspire to be something for them?
And exactly what I've just said. It's just I don't want them to be their lives to be controlled. I want them to live a life to the fullest as to who they are, and the best representation of mom and dad, who are, I hope, upstanding, law-abiding, tax-paying citizens, and they get to actually pursue what they want to do, and actually do it, and not succumb to the societal pressures of a culturally backward parents who only want them to go to a certain industry in the field of work, or achieve academic grades that will make their parents look good in front of other parents, because that's what's happening there.
Yep.
And I just want them to be the best version of themselves. And we really we don't put any pressure on them. But and sometimes you find when there's no pressure, children really flourish, as opposed to all this pressure has been put on them to become something that you were never once, and you're trying to live. You want your kids to be the version that you never was, and that kind of pressure can really break children.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? I think
I think so. Yeah. Like, basically, you're trying to give them just a nice, healthy environment,
a platform,
to grow up.
yeah,
and to maybe become community leaders as well. Like you're setting the way. You're out there. You're an ethnic minority. You've had some struggles moving here, but now you're out there. You're becoming successful and known for the business that you created. Would you have realised 20 years ago? Would you ever thought you were here creating a business?
Get off the
Australia?
drugs. What are you smoking? If someone else, like, if the Oracle said to me in my early 20s, and said, John, in your mid-40s, you'll be running a business in Melbourne with 3 kids who are Australian born. Well done. I would say, get off the drugs, Oracle. Jeez.
Never would have thought it coming.
No way.
Yeah.
But you go where the wind blows, and the wind has blew us here, and the roots are quite firmly entrenched here.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know where the wind may blow, and the kids may be blown further south, because my grandparents went south from China to Malaysia. My parents went south from Malaysia to Singapore. I went south from Singapore to Melbourne.
Yeah.
And the only place further south the kids can go is Tassie.
Yeah. Or Antarctica.
And yes, I don't know where they're going to go.
By the time they're old enough, maybe there'll be more hospitable conditions.
That's right.
But do you know, once you get to the bottom, then you start coming up again. So
hello, Greenland. How are you?
You can pop back up.
That's right.
Pop back up the other side.
Yeah.
So where do you want to take, so you've got, Money Jar Concept. It's becoming recognised, well-known, award-winning. Humans of Sky telling some fantastic stories. But where do you want to go? Where do you want to take it?
I can see myself I no longer have I no longer churn through as many humans as I did the first few years.
Stories, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, the stories,
Yeah.
human stories.
Yeah.
I probably do 6 to 8 a year now because the business is really growing. My family business is really growing. So that community page is still going to exist. It's my little outlet for my creative expression, and just a little way of getting a bit of writing involved.
Yep.
And whereas the family business just it's still me, and I don't want to grow it too big to the point where I have 10 staff. It's just I'm not a good people management person. I just can't see myself managing people.
Yeah.
But I can manage myself. I can regulate myself.
Yeah.
And I think I just want to get to a point where it's comfortable, and I can. And sometimes it's a way of. I like to say I'm pushing myself hard because it's kind of like a big middle finger to the country that I left, who said you were a failure as a student because you dropped out of poly. You were from Malaysia, so if you're from Malaysia, it's kind of like you make jokes about people who come from country Victoria or you're from Tassie. You've kind of those, you're like a lesser version of us. So growing up in Singapore, I was always being told, "Oh, you're Malaysian, so you're not going to make it.
Ah.
You're a school dropout. You're not going to make it. You're not from a wealthy family. You're not going to make it." So coming here and creating the version of myself that I want to be, and far exceeding what I've ever thought it might be.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
the expectations that others had for you.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a big middle finger to everyone who never gave me a chance. And had I not left, I probably would have tick the box that they think I would have fallen into.
Yep.
But I didn't, but it took a massive leap of faith, and I'm just going overseas and with no family support to get to where I am. But I'm happy where I am. It's the life that I wanted, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate you coming in today and
thanks.
telling your story. And I hope that you can continue the energy you have for community and all of the things that you've done for the people. I'm sure we're going to see you on a lot more billboards getting around. We're going to have John's going to be everywhere you look.
Yeah.
But congratulations on your success with both the page and your mortgage broking, and we wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you, Andy.
Ang Keng Hong.
Yes, my legal name. You said it right.
Thanks for coming.
Points. Thanks
for coming on the show. It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining
everyone.
me on the Good People podcast.
Well, it's a tip of the cap, it's a pat on the back, it's a smile from ear to ear. They're the good people from round here. They're the good people from round here. Come on, let me introduce you to a few.